Hey friend, thanks for listening to the Fixate Phoenix podcast. We are praying that you are blessed by this week's message. If you would like to partner with the future of Fixate, you can visit fixatephx.com/give. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, baby. Thank you. We've been in a series now for the last 3 weeks. We will be continuing in, and we have called it Message in the Miracle. Today is part 3, Message in the Miracle, part 3, and I have titled it, Looks Can Be Deceiving. Looks can be deceiving. Once again, this is part 3 of that. I encourage you, if you weren't able to listen to any of the previous ones, Micah Shaw did a great job that first week. I was kind of mid the second week, but this third week, I promise, we're going to really hit it out of the park. But today, like I said, we're going to be talking about something called looks can be deceiving. Now, it's kind of funny. I didn't say this bonus content in the first service, but second service. How many of us have eaten something where you look at it and you're like, no way am I going to eat that? And then you eat it and you're just like, ooh, that was really good. I'm not going to name things, so I don't want to incriminate people. But essentially what I'm trying to get at is oftentimes I feel like in life, what we think, what we perceive, what our eyes tell us sometimes can be very deceiving of what truly is going on. And today we're going to be talking about a miracle. And what we've been doing these last few weeks is talking about miracles that from a surface level narrative don't really make a ton of sense. And what I mean by that is last week, if you were here, you know that we talked about the gold in the fish's mouth, which is a miracle that's only referenced in the Gospel of Mark. But in the Gospel of Mark, it kind of has an interesting subplot going on that we spent a decent amount of time talking about last week. Because the big barrel of miracles where it's the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on the waves, the doing the raising from the dead, the healing the blind eyes, right? We're all Christians. We're like, amen, I want those miracles. But then there's easy ones where we read it and they can be a little bit overlooked. And what I mean by that is today is a perfect example of a miracle that when you look at it, you go, not sure what was going on here. And that's kind of what we're trying to do over these next few weeks is point out miracles that when you read them, you go, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But then when you dive into the deep understanding of what is being communicated, they start to come alive. So today we are going to be focusing on Mark 11:12 through verse 24, talking about a weird miracle in which Jesus goes full anger management toward a plant. This story is the equivalent of you showing up to a restaurant that you really like, it is closed, and throwing a temper tantrum in the parking lot. Because Jesus, what we're going to read here in a second, is he is somebody who looks at a fig tree from a distance, sees that it's in leaf, walks up, finds out it doesn't have any figs, and what does he do? He curses it. And that, in and of itself, is the miracle we're going to be talking about. Let's read the full story. It says this. On the next day, when they had left Bethany, this is Jesus and his disciples, Jesus became hungry. Seeing at a distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season of figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat from you again." And his disciples were listening. Once again, this is what's funny about this passage. It's easy to read it and go, oh yeah, it makes sense. Jesus would curse a fig tree. But you're like, okay, it literally says in the story, it's not in season for figs. So what's happening is this. Jesus most likely, I'm going to incriminate myself here in a good way. But I love fresh squeezed orange juice. Fresh squeeze. Now the best price on fresh squeezed orange juice is at Trader Joe's. The only problem is they only carry it for a certain amount of the year. But when it is there, I am so excited because it is in season. Jesus, I guarantee, is somebody who likes figs, which I did like fig Newtons at one point. Kind of still do. Don't judge me. Anyway, and he's probably somebody he's hungry. He looks and says, "Ooh, a fig tree. It's not in season." But what's going on? The appearance of the outside of this plant makes me believe there is fruit I can consume. So what does Jesus do? He walks up to the fig tree and leaf. Looking at the fig tree and leaf, what does he do? He looks at it and says, okay, there is no figs here. You gave the appearance of something you are not. Which then, what happens? A curse is pronounced upon that tree. Now, this is where the story gets interesting. And I'm reading all of this because many of us, when we read this story, we're like, Jesus doesn't make a whole lot of sense why we're just going full scorched earth on a random plant. But what a lot of us don't realize is this entire miracle is actually based in the sequencing that takes place around it. So sequencing being this next particular passage, it says this. Verse 15, then they came to Jerusalem, which we can readily ascertain that they'd been on the road of Bethany going to Jerusalem. And we find out that this is actually Palm Sunday. It says this, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple, overturning the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise to the temple. And he began to teach and say to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it into a robber's den. I know I just said it was Palm Sunday. That's what Mark 12, 1 through 12 talks about. So literally we got Jesus' triumphant entry. And on kind of the way to that triumphant entry, curses a plant, then goes into the city and clears out the temple. And then this next passage, verse 18, it says that the chief priests and scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him. And the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching. Verse 19. Then we go back to the story. When evening came, they would go out of the city. As they were passing by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots up. So we got triumphant entry and curse a fig tree and then purify the temple and then go out of the city. And as you're coming back the next day, guess what? That fig tree he cursed is now withered. Now, what's interesting about this process is it mentions that it is withered from the roots upward. Now, if you know anything about a dead fruit tree or a withering fruit tree, you would know that how you would first kind of decipher if it was dying is if it didn't have any leaves on it. This particular passage doesn't point out the absence of leaves. It rather points out the withering of the root system, which I find that ironic. Let's continue to read. It says this. Being reminded, Peter, of course it was him, said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered. And Jesus answered, saying to them, have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that when he says is going to happen, it will be granted to him. Therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received, and they will be granted to you. Sequencing, Mark 12, here we go. We've got Jesus' triumphant entry, in which we talked about this a few weeks ago on our Palm Sunday here, that many people believe Jesus would be the second coming of a man by the name of Judas Maccabeus, a liberator of the Jewish temple and restorer of the government order of Israel into its independence. However, he didn't do that, and that's one way you go from being celebrated to crucified, is when you do the opposite of everybody else thinks, because he shows up and he purifies the temple. Now, sandwiched in that story is this fig tree illustration. And then my favorite part is literally Peter goes, hey man, look, the tree you cursed is dead. And Jesus is like, well, duh, if you look at a mountain, you can move it too. It's like we read miracle stories all the time. We're like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, if I'm one of Jesus' disciples, I'm like, what? Yeah, okay, it's one thing to curse a fig tree. It's another thing to look at a mountain and just say, yeah, get up, throw yourself into the sea, my dog. Right? So what am I getting at? The sequencing of it all is so jumbled all over the place. Doesn't really make sense. What is going on behind the scenes? And I would even say this almost becomes the lesson that I'm trying to teach today, is the looks can be deceiving about this entire passage, because many of us, we can read passages and pull the lessons, but what we don't realize in all of this story, the fig tree is actually, everything is connected to it. But before we do, I want to talk about one of my most painful memories of being somebody who thought one thing because of looks and then found out a whole nother reality. Now, when you're in high school, in a small town in the Midwest, the only thing that matters is typically what sport you're playing if you were a male back in the day. Which, it is kind of funny, there's like this new phenomenon where you can be a gamer and be just as cool as an athlete and kind of do a bunch of other things and be just as cool. When I was growing up, it was either you played sports or you didn't. And there were things attached to that. Anyway, but I remember I grew up playing football, and I was all heart and no size. And I loved to play defensive back. I was a corner for our team. And I tell you what, I grew up playing football my whole life, really enjoyed it. The only problem was I was 5'10", 145 pounds. All heart. And I'll never forget my junior year. I was having a really, really good year. I played corner, and that year our team was 7-1. I'd had 5 interceptions, which is a lot if you're keeping track. I'm trying to pump myself up because I'm about to prick it with a hammer. But I remember I'm playing football in about our 7th or 8th game. We're playing a team that's undefeated. And as we're watching film that week, what we pick up quickly is they have one receiver on their team. You guys all know where I'm going with this because I'm going to go there. They got one receiver on their team that's about 6'6", but he's like 160 pounds. I mean, a rail thin. And I look at this guy, and you watch film, he's kind of gangly, doesn't move well, not very quick, but he's just really tall. And so they just throw up rainbow passes, and nobody can jump. But I was a pretty good athlete, and I'd covered taller guys before, and so I was like, dude, I am going to have a game this week. That week, invited about 20 of my close friends and family to the game. Really excited about it. We lace it up. I watch this guy warm up. As I'm watching him warm up, man, I'm looking and I'm going, oh yeah, I am going to get after this, right? And so literally, first play of the game, they do a run play. Second play of the game, the guy comes off the line. I jam him. I am right in his hip pocket. They throw a rainbow pass into this guy, and I'm like, I am getting another interception. So here I am running with this guy. I'm watching the ball as it's coming down. And all I remember is jumping up, just being like, yes, and the ball never coming down to meet me. And this kid grabs it, and I fall on top of him for a soft 40-yard gain. And I get up, and I look at him. I said, you were lucky on that one. I was right there. Third play of the game, run play. Fourth play of the game, guess what happens? Another rainbow, except this time, instead of a 40-yard gain, it's a 40-yard touchdown. Right here, Micah jumps up. Oh, yeah, I'm about to get another interception. Just kidding. I just gave up a touchdown. At halftime, it was 42-14. I had given up 4 touchdowns. This guy's stat line would have won fantasy football for the entire year. He had I'm not kidding, had to have had 7 catches, 4 of them for touchdowns, and every catch was at least 40 yards. The guy didn't even run a route other than just go as far as you can. We'll throw it as high as we can, and you'll jump over the skinny little white kid. And so here's the deal. That was it. And I'll never forget, at halftime, my coach came up to me, and he pulls me aside, and he goes, hey, man, we're going to pull you for the second half. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm fighting him, and he's like, hey, we're going to need you for next week. This one's over, buddy. This one's over. And what's funny about that story, though, is I go into the game, and I'm perceiving that it is going to go my way, that I have immense ability, that whatever I am up against, I am going to dominate. And then what happened, I found out quickly, looks can be deceiving. And you can carry them as trauma into your mid-30s. I paid the price as I overestimated my abilities and what I was doing and capable of. And I underestimated who I really was and what I was really up against that day. See, that day I was more a leaf in the wind than I was a valuable fruit to the defense I was on. I want to talk about how to not be deceived in the focus of the wrong things. That if you focus on them too long could leave you burned and defeated at the end of the game of life. Or withered from the roots up of a life you thought you had in God. I'm pretty readily convinced that in this day and age, we as a Christian culture have focused on leaves and maybe missed fruit. Leaves that can give off an appearance or an image of fruit, but a life that is rooted and rhythmic in God that we don't have, that doesn't have fruit. See, what am I trying to get at? I believe that Jesus, as he's walking up to this bush, he's expecting something that he's not getting from it. And I say that because when we profess lordship, when God comes close into our hearts and into our lives, and he exposes what has been growing in our souls, what does he see? Because the appearance of leaves does not always constitute the presence of fruit. That fruit cultivation is a whole other story in and of itself. See, if you were to go to a store right now, you could buy a fruit tree with leaves on it. However, fruit, I'm going to talk about in a second, has a long process before it can be picked or consumed. And so today what I want to talk about is how to make sure your leaves are producing fruit. I want to talk about today how to make sure your leaves are producing fruit. Number one is this. No matter what you do externally, Jesus will always seek to purify you internally. How he purifies is by drawing close enough to challenge the leaves of your spirit to produce the fruit of him. If you're the one who sings and yells, Hosanna, don't be surprised when the Spirit shows up in the temple of your heart to purify it in order to produce the right fruit of a surrendered spirit. External fruit is born from the internally disciplined life. The internal life must be reoriented, repositioned, and renewed to the heart of Jesus for fruit to be produced. Most people would look at this story and fail to realize through the sequencing that's taking place what is actually going on. For as Mark starts talking about Jesus' triumphant entry, and then takes a hard left to go full ADD about this fruit tree, then jumps back to Jesus cleansing the temple and flipping tables, then goes back to a tree that's withered, then finishes with famous lines, truly I say, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will be done. All these things are connected. The key to the entire passage, I'm going to say this slow so you get it, is that Mark literally defined the fig tree by the stories that surrounded it. Jerusalem, the city that Jesus rides into, looks leafy. They allow him to walk in and celebrate him with Hosanna, coats on the ground and palm trees waving. They have the leaves present of a fruitful life in him. But as he gets close to the temple of worship, the place of which the most holy and revered spot is in their society, he finds no fruit, rather a fruit of greed, with money changers and dovesmen selling at exorbitant prices. The fruit of keeping a law while not keeping relationship and the leafiness that truly is. He sees a plant that is withered to the roots. See, this entire miracle lesson is more what surrounds the passage just as much as what's in it, which is the point of today, assessing and understanding what is around us and within us to make sure we haven't focused so much on the leaves that we have forgotten the fruit. See, appearances can be done today at a bare basic easy level of maintenance, right? All of our life, I feel like in the culture that we have been raised, is to give off the appearance of surface level success, surface level status, surface level, look at me, look at what I've done, all of these things. But God, when he comes close, doesn't assess your surface, he assesses your soul. And in drawing close, just as he draws close to this fig tree, the appearance of leaves is very different than the productivity of fruit. And asking ourselves the question, what fruit am I producing? Because in this particular story, what we see is that Jerusalem had the appearance of fruit by its exterior, what was going on, but internally the disposition and the heart posture was different. It was not what it was supposed to be. So I ask you today, what is the heart posture of your life? Because to go through the things that externally we're taught to do is very, very different than to have a soul that says, I am surrendered, I am obedient, I give you lordship, I will sacrifice, I will depend, I will be rhythmic, I will be consistent. These things are very different because, believe it or not, that is what produces fruit. Man, I'm going to tell you this. The first year we lived here, my wife wanted a lemon tree so bad. What'd we do? We bought a lemon tree. What'd we find out quick? We ain't going to grow it. Because what it took to just get that thing was withered to the core in about 3 months. Why? Because the idea of fruit is different than the production of it. And many of us, we can talk about the idea of what spiritual fruit is, but when assessing your life up close, can people taste that fruit? The second thing I have for you today is this. The fruit of a healthy tree is there to be picked by others. If people can't see the fruit of a godly lifestyle or don't want to pick the fruit that is present in your life, be careful, as the roots may be withering. The purpose of fruit being picked is so a tree can produce more in the future. You cannot be a tree that produces fruit if you're too busy being a tree that protects its fruit. Don't be a leaf that turns to a thorn when you're supposed to be a fig that quenches the needs of the hungry souls of this world. You know, when I first moved here, I enjoyed golfing. And so when we first moved here, there was a huge difference between golfing in Michigan and golfing in Arizona. And the difference is this, is if you golf in Michigan, when you hit a ball out of bounds and you try to find it, you usually are like kicking through leaves or sticks or maybe some trees. You lose a ball in Arizona, you risk your life to try to find it. I mean, the amount of thorns, razor blades, it's like the trees are paid to extract blood from you. And I'll never forget my first times golfing. I'm like, man, like I can find my ball. By the end, I'm like, take my money. I don't even want that ball anymore. Why? Because literally everything is designed to cut you. Now, why is that though? Has anybody ever thought about that? Many of us could be like, well, there's no water, so everything's thorny. But why is it that the absence of water equals more thorns? Great question. As I was out driving around one time early on, I felt the Lord kind of ask that question to me. And so I start, per usual, Googling a lot of things. And as I'm Googling more and more, trying to understand why does every single thing in Arizona have thorns or razor blades on it, what I come to find out is that actually all of these trees and all of these things, if they were in climates that produced water, the thorns wouldn't actually be present. The thorns were actually dried tines. And what I mean by that is when you hold up a leaf, there's these little tines in it that you see. If it's all green, it typically has these almost like, it's like the bone structure that as the surface of that leaf grows, it holds the leaf out to be able to, one, collect sunlight and collect moisture. What happens when there's too much sunlight and not enough moisture is the surface area starts to shrivel to the point that it only produces tines. Tines are what thorns are. They're literally spined. They're supposed to be leaves with surface areas. They're supposed to be able to produce life for the tree. But because it does not have enough water, it is shifted into, you ready for this? Self-protection. Because every part of the climate now looks to get to the water, which is what everybody needs to survive. And so ultimately, to protect itself, it produces thorns. It produces briars, everything you can imagine. If we're going to get pricked by anything, you can do it in the state of Arizona. Why did I tell you that, though? Because many of us, we've tasted the water of God, but then instead of offering that water to other people, it can very easily become this water is only for me and only for the people I love. The fruit of my life is protected. And what you have to realize is this, when fruit is picked, it's picked under the pretense, yes, of giving away, but also when it's picked, it produces more. Many of us, our agenda of fruit being present in our lives is nobody pick it unless you're worth picking what is mine. But in Jesus, what we see is that we will never understand or fully know who gets to pick, why they get to pick. But we do know that if we are rooted in His waters, we should be producing fruit that everybody's picking. And trusting that our roots are deep enough that He's going to produce more as we're picked and more as we're picked. There should only be two things in faith. Two types of movements as a believer. Growing more fruit and being picked of our fruit. And that's it. If the fruit of your life is all inwardly focused, you're going to be a thorn quicker than you think. If the fruit of your life is you don't deserve what I have, you don't need what I have, you're not what I have, whatever it is, fill in the blank. Oh, they don't vote this way. Oh, but they believe this. Oh, yeah. It's like, okay, what do you think? Who do you think picked Jesus' fruit? Who were the people around him that he allowed close? They weren't people who could offer him anything. He was the Son of God. That's my biggest pet peeve. The only people who can pick my fruit is somebody who can trade me something back. Who was trading Jesus anything? My man couldn't even walk around in crowds without getting pressed up on. What am I trying to get at? I'm just so frustrated today with the state of Christianity that controls the transactional element of fruit picking. I'm so concerned with people who've been raised on the appearance of, well, I give fruit out, but it's like, only if it's quantifiable, only if it makes sense, only if I can dictate how the fruit is processed after it's been picked. What am I getting at? Man, if everything what are you trying to do in all that control? Are you in control when you profess lordship? Because I can tell you this, if you want to be in control and you want to profess lordship, your roots are already withered. Because nothing about life in God is, guess what? You got full control and just dictate your terms to me. Take care. It's totally fine. We'll do whatever you want. That's not producing fruit. That's producing leaves. See, what am I trying to get at today? Jesus walks up in a period of time in which the appearance of a harvest was present, but it was not. The tree had been rooted and drinking water, and the leaves were present for growth, giving the appearance of something it did not possess. See, some of us today, we want fruit that no one has to pick, or that rather we can only give to people of our choosing. But I'm going to tell you, you're either being picked or you're growing. 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 Which one are you? Because it's easy to say, okay, well, I'm growing in my faith in God. And that's okay. There's grace for that. But if your growth is not producing fruit, then what is your growth doing? And so today, what I want to talk about with my final time is this. Point number 3. It's easier to choose leafiness over fruitfulness. Anyone can grow leaves, but it is hard to produce fruit. Leafiness is elementary knowledge of Scripture, but not fruit of the Spirit present in my life. Leafiness has spiritual activity, but not deep sacrificial dependency. Leafiness knows what to say. Fruitfulness learns to listen and discern what the Spirit is saying. Leafiness wants a testimony, but won't embrace the test it takes to produce the fruit of one. You produce leaves first, then you produce fruit. But the leaves will never, ever be the same as fruit. You know, I told you I was going to give you a way out, and I'm going to give it to you here. If you actually research fruit trees from leaf to fruit time frame, it's actually interesting what you'll see. And there's going to be 2 time frames I'm going to give you. There's going to be perfect condition time frame, and then there's also going to be not so perfect condition, but steadily kind of consistent time frame. So, you ready for this? Apple trees, perfect conditions, 2 years before you pick your first apple. 5 years if the conditions aren't the best. Apricots, which in Southern California where I grew up, we had a tree of this in my yard, 2 to 5 years. Bananas, 2 to 3 years. Cherries, 4 to 7 years. Peaches, 2 to 4 years. Figs, ironically, only 1 to 2 years. If these trees do not have leaves, they won't be able to grow fruit. So for years, there is only leaves present. And that's good news. Why? Because it's going to take some years to produce fruit for God. So many of us are like, okay, thank you. I don't have a ton of fruit, but I am committed to growing. Now, there's an inverse to this. There's also bad news. And the bad news, if it's been some years and there's no fruit, there may be a painful interaction that takes place within your circumstances to reorient you back to the Father's fruitful plan for your life. Meaning, I'll get myself in trouble here. I mean, you could sit here all day and say, man, I've got 10 years of church attendance and about 10 minutes of Christian growth. Right. And I'm going to tell you, it is one thing to sit here and say, I'm doing the things, but the things are not about doing, they're about producing fruit. It's about fruit production for the world around us. I want to spend some time on this, right? In this particular point, I want to go line by line on some of this leafiness versus fruitfulness. The first one was this: the leafiness of elementary knowledge, but not the fruit of the Spirit. Elementary knowledge, I know what to say. I know John 3:16. I can pass the eye exam of somebody who has no idea of what it means to be a follower. I can get by with doing the basic movements of contemporary Western first world Christianity. But then we get into Galatians 5:22, and this is where we all get exposed. The fruit of the Spirit, meaning I profess lordship. The Spirit comes in. As the Spirit comes in, it transforms my heart and my spirit to produce the fruits of that Spirit and not my flesh. And that is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Or let me read it like this. Would people describe my life as loving? Would people describe me as joyful? I do feel like I have that one down. My wife, sometimes too much. Would people describe me as peaceful? Would people describe me as patient? Definitely lacking in that one. Definitely lacking. Would people describe me as kind? Would people describe me as good? Would people describe me as faithful? Would people describe me as gentle? Having empathy, standing with people in whatever they're facing, gentle. Would people describe me as that? Would people describe me as having self-control, doing what I know I should and not doing what I know I shouldn't be doing? Do I have self-control? See, all of a sudden, it's like many of us, one or two of those spoke to us differently than the other ones. What am I trying to say? As this Spirit comes in, it starts to teach us. This is the fruit I want to produce in your life. But it is easy to talk about fruit and what we know that fruit should be. It's a whole nother element to produce that fruit. And for that fruit to be so evident that people pick it from us by our presence around them. The second one. Leafiness is the leafiness of a spiritual activity, but no fruit of dependency. Man, I have developed just such a deep reverence for dependency these last 4 years. Me and my wife, when we moved here, we had a great job, a great church lined up that we were supposed to take over. We felt like the Lord called us to move here with 2 friends about 4 years ago. And when we moved here, I have never in my entire life been more dependent on God. We knew no one, 0 connections, full faith, no church org, no oversee denominational, just God, we trust you. The level of dependency I've had to walk in the last 4 years has been the most terrifying thing, but also the most beautiful experience I've ever had in God. Many of us, we want beautiful experiences as long as it requires 0 sacrifice, 0 dependency, 0 anything that comes against my comfort, 0 anything that says sacrifice your flesh and trust me, 0 of any of that. Why? Because just as much as we have to learn the theology of God, we have to unlearn the theology of man. And the theology of man is consumerism, materialism, consumption, greed. And I'm not saying these things are bad, but if you do not have rhythmic activity that submits that theology to the theology of God, you will be withering, but thinking you have leaves. Sacrifice and dependency is the most beautiful thing. Think about Jesus' life. His most sacrificial moment becomes the moment he is most remembered and the most beautiful moment in human history. What beauty are you trusting and seeking God for in the midst of the sacrifice of your life? Because if you want all of God but have to trade none of yourself, And many of us were like, well, I don't know if I have time in this season. I don't know what it looks like in this season. I don't know what this means in this season. I'm going to tell you this. That will always be present. But if God doesn't touch your early mornings, if God isn't touching your late nights, if God isn't touching your bank account, if God is not touching your appetites and your desires, one of the most profound activities I've ever had in my life is prayer and fasting weekly. The testimonies and the fruit I have seen from that are so undeniable that if everything else failed, I could never doubt what I've seen God do through just that alone. What am I trying to get at? Orienting your spirit to Him will require orienting your person to be able to experience that presence. How are you orienting your person? It's not just going to be, I showed up to church. It's not just going to be like, I like posted on my story like 7 words of a scripture. It's going to be, what is most valuable to you that you will rhythmically place at His feet. Rhythmically. Say, God, I'm depending on you in such a way that I must see a dimension of your goodness. That I must see the action and the activity of your Spirit on the offering of my life. Once again, I pray we are not a church that cries out for more of God if it requires nothing of me. Dependency. Man, if you do it, there's beauty. The third one, the leafiness of knowing what to say, but not the fruit of developing a deep sensitivity to the Spirit of God. I'm going to tell you this, if you know all the words to say, that's great, but if you have not developed a deep sensitivity to the Spirit of God, producing a fruit for others. What am I trying to get at? This week, I actually had somebody send me a voice memo, and I tell you this not to virtue signal, but I tell you this because there's testimony that God wants in your life if you will train yourself to discern the words of Him. This week there was somebody who is moving away for a season, and as they were moving away, they said, I want to thank you so much because you saw me about 2 years ago in a prayer room on a Wednesday afternoon. And when you saw me in that prayer room, I was in a little crisis of faith, didn't really know what my relationship with God was going to be, but you came up to me and you prayed for me. And I don't actually personally remember what I prayed over him, but I pray over a lot of people because I'm super holy and spiritual. But he said, I remember from that day what you said, and if you wouldn't have done that, I don't know where I would have been. And what's funny is I was in a prayer room, and it's easy in a prayer room to be like, God, I just want to sit and soak and listen to you and just be your best friend. And this is almost, I feel like, what happens with spiritual maturity. Is it's so easy to just be like, form me inwardly, form me inwardly, form me inwardly. Do nothing with me outwardly, do nothing with me outward. Form me inwardly, cure my thoughts, cure my anxieties. Don't use me for anything outside of that. Cure my stresses, cure my worries, but don't use me for anything outside of it. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. And I'll never forget, this person was like, listen, if you wouldn't have done that, I don't know where I would be today. Because those words and what you spoke over my life activated me to a point in which I've encountered God in profound ways. What if you listening to God's voice actually means that your voice becomes God's voice to others around you? What if you listening in such a deep way transforms the way you live to a point in which you become what other people are looking for? They just didn't know it would come from you. Some of the greatest things I've ever said have never touched a stage and never will. The greatest transformations, some of the most incredible stories I've been a part of have nothing to do with a microphone, have nothing to do with a social media moment. They have everything to do with, does God have my time? Does He have my attention? And do I have a sensitivity not to know His word, but to hear His Spirit and become that Spirit in the world I live? My final thing for you today is this. Oh, that's great hearing God retreat there, plugged. If you're somebody in here, you're like, I don't even know what that means. That seems weird. Get through. We'll spend 3 days together. Talk to me if it's weird after. Anyway, but I want to encourage you. If you're somebody where you're like, that doesn't make sense. I don't really know. How could I be a voice for God? I want to challenge you. After this service, cupcake table. Trina's in the front row. She'll be there. Answer any questions you have about hearing God retreat, because we believe at church that hears and listens and postures its heart and its life to be a vessel of God's voice in this world that edifies, exhorts, strengthens, and builds up people. That is what we long to be as a church. My final one of these lines: leafiness wants a testimony, but won't embrace the test it takes to produce one. You know, there's an interesting book. It's called Good Faith. Great book if you ever want to read it. I'm a big reader. But Good Faith and The Next Christians by Gabe Lyons and David Kinnaman. They talked about the sign of the future mature follower in Christ. One word: resiliency. Resiliency. Resilient faith. When we have every reason to walk away, do we stay faithful? When we have every reason to doubt, do we still choose to have faith? When we have every excuse to become jaded, offended, and cynical, do we stay tender and stay the course? When we have every reason to doubt the goodness of God because of the presence of our scars, do we trust still in resurrection power? For we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. You know what the word of a testimony is? Somebody who overcame a test that most would fail. See, I think that's the stories that history and Hollywood film and rewrite. The stories of tests that people would not take. Most people would not take, but a few took and said, "No, I will not quit. I will not fail. I will continue." I want to even say this: fruitfulness is a long obedience in the same direction as Eugene Peterson says. And I challenge you today, in the presence of your scars, to press in deeper. The press in the questioning and the tension of complexity of who God is to you, to stay consistent, to stay rooted, to stay rhythmic, to stay fixated. Because I truly believe if your gaze is upon the Creator, He longs to create with your life. Looks can be deceiving, but if you look upon Him, you might be deceived with what actually you could become because you didn't believe it would be possible. Look upon Him today. Would you stand to your feet? As the band comes up, I challenge you. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes today? Here at our church, we take literally the "be still and know that I'm God." And I challenge you, maybe some of us are like, stillness is weird. Yeah, because in our culture, to sit in a room alone with our thoughts, to be still and sensitive to the voice of God is something that sounds so foreign and so outlandish that it's tough to be present in that. I challenge you, would you be still? Maybe ask God, do you have something for me this morning? Is there something you're wanting to highlight in my heart or in my life? We're going to take a second to just be still, and then we'll recite the Lord's Prayer and worship with one final song.